Science fiction writer and futurist Robert J. Sawyer has been interviewed around 800 times on radio and television and countless times in print. He's a member of the Order of Canada and is one of only 8 writers in history and the only Canadian to win all 3 of the world's top science fiction awards for the best novel of the year, the Hugo, the Nebula, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. Don't go away. When we come back, we talk to Robert Sawyer. If you're just joining us, welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. I'm your host, Bridgetti Banda from Cape Town in South Africa. This stream is made possible by StreamYard and Creative Edge. To know when we go live, please go ahead and like our Facebook page so you get a notification. And over on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and that notification bell, will you? In today's show, we're going to talk to none other than Robert Sawyer about his latest release, called The Oppenheimer Alternative. But first, hello to my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She's a special needs and disabilities advocate and also the author of the Poolicious Children Books series. Mary, hello. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's so nice to see you today. And I'm super excited about this interview. And I've told my mom she needs to pop in because I know this is the book she's going to want to read. So she's an avid reader and I'm excited to interview him. He's done a lot of good, awesome things, hasn't he?
Yes, absolutely. So Robert has won the Best Novel Hugo Award for Hominids. Oh, I'm gonna totally butcher that name now. I'll just ask him to say it because I'm tongue-tied.
Okay.
He's also won the Best Novel Nebula Award for The Terminal Experiment and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award for Mindscan. I can say that one. Mm-hmm. And he's also won, in addition to that, 50 other writing awards. The ABC TV series FlashForward was based on his novel of the same name, and his 24th novel, the one we're talking about today, The Oppenheimer Alternative, is out now. Rob holds honorary doctorates from the University of Winnipeg and the Laurentian University. He was also one of the initial inductees into the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. And he is also a member of the Order of Canada, his country's highest honor. So let's not waste any more time and invite Robert onto the show, shall we?
Well, welcome, Robert. You've led a very boring life, haven't you?
Well, it's been boring these last 5 or 6 months during COVID-19 when we've all been locked down and experiencing much less than our usual excitement. I would have been on book tour for most of a month in June when the Oppenheimer Alternative came out. I would have been doing the literary festival circuit that we have here in Canada all summer long, and bookstore signings. So it's been not the excitement that I expected at this particular juncture. When you have a new book out, it's a little bit like having a new family member, and you want to celebrate and go out and share the joy with everybody. And we're doing the best we can, including this wonderful event right now online.
Hey, you know what? We are so grateful for technology, aren't we? That we can continue, because as an author, I know, when everything hit, everyone I know, even here in the States, had to cancel everything. I mean, you can't do schools, you can't do libraries, you can't do public events anywhere. And it was so devastating for everyone I know in many, many, many ways. I did hear on the TV news yesterday that before COVID, 10 million users on Zoom, and now like 300 million or something like that. I don't know. It was like really, really crazy and number. And I was like, oh my gosh. So here in the States yesterday, Zoom crashed for about 5 hours. So kids did not get any of their schoolwork done.
Well, my friend William Gibson, who's another Canadian science fiction writer, says, the future is already here. It's just not widely distributed. He's been saying that for 20 years. But this Zoom example is exactly right. People were unfamiliar with the fact that, you're in the United States, I'm in Canada, Bridgetti is in South Africa, unfamiliar with the fact that free worldwide video calling and conferencing, that the ability to work from home was such a mature technology. And, my colleagues, going right back to 1895, when H.G. Wells wrote about a potential pandemic in his story, The Stolen Bacillus, we've been warning the world that this was coming down the pike. We're so, if you can say anything, fortunate about it, that it happened in 2020 instead of 2010 or 2000, when we simply weren't prepared technologically to deal with it as well as we are today.
Absolutely.
Right. It's had such an equalizing effect. I was speaking to somebody in Australia, talking to people around the globe, and saying to her that, it is amazing how it's changed the way we do things. Because in January of this year, you had big companies still saying you can't work from home.
Yes.
And it excluded the disabled and differently abled community. It excluded moms that needed to take care of their children. They were completely excluded from the workforce. And along came COVID, and in just one foul sweep of a week, all of that changed, and suddenly we can work from home quite efficiently.
Not only can we, but some big companies like Twitter in the United States is saying this has worked so well that even after the pandemic is over, huge swaths of our workforce will let you continue to work at home. You're so right, Bridgetti, that people push back against any change. And then when it's forced upon them, they say, oh, not only is this not so bad, but this is actually in many ways an improvement.
Well, and it's saving, there are ways that it's saving companies money, it's saving people money. I know, our gas bill went way down. It was like, oh, hey, there's a little bit more money in the bank because we're home so much. It's like, okay, I like this.
We just got a rebate on our car insurance because we're not driving anywhere, right? And out of the blue, the insurer just sent us, here, have some money back because we're insuring you against something that you're not even doing, and that's not fair.
Wow. That's nice. Hey, good thing for a company with integrity. You don't find those everywhere. So wow, that's amazing. Okay, I'm coming to Canada for car insurance.
and health insurance.
Yeah, amen to that.
Health insurance.
Ooh, it's amazing how crazy it is in the United States. And we've got the election coming up, and it's like, and I should not say this anymore, but I've been through COVID. I was like, okay, things are going to hell in a handbag, and it's continuing. And so I don't say that anymore because I don't want that to be our truth, because it really it's really gotten quite crazy. You just don't even want to turn the TV on anymore here.
So let's talk about that beautiful little book that you've got behind you.
Yeah.
And so, Robert, I want to know, how did you get started with writing? You know, how did your love affair with words start? And what is it that drew you into science fiction in particular?
So way back in 1972, I was just 12 years old. My older brother had a beat up paperback science fiction novel. And I guess he had found it, it was used when he got it. He'd read it. He gave it to me. And unlike most people who go through these stages, which are you start to read in a field that somehow intrigues you, you eventually cotton onto the notion that actual human beings wrote this book. And then even later you realize, and I maybe could even be one of those human beings. That's the normal progression. This particular book by a science fiction writer named Alan E. Nurse, that's how it was pronounced, Nourse, but pronounced Nurse, began with an introduction by him, a foreword called I've Never Been There, about the joys of being a science fiction writer. So before I'd even read my first science fiction book, here was a guy saying, not only it's great fun to do, but you can do it too. And so even before I'd read one, I knew I wanted to be one because he made it sound like such fun. And science fiction, I mean, I alluded to the fact that I was 12 in 72. That means I was born in 1960. That was the decade of the international space race between the United States and the Soviet Union to put the first human being on the moon. That was the decade in which Star Trek premiered on American television. That was the decade of two of the biggest blockbuster science fiction films of all time, 2001: A Space Odyssey and the original Planet of the Apes. With that as my backdrop, and two academics as parents who immediately would encourage any intellectual pursuit, there was no way I couldn't end up being a science fiction fan, reader, and writer.
Well, that is amazing that, you know, things worked out quite that way for you.
Absolutely.
We talk about privilege, and I'm the first to say that I was privileged. I had parents who, you know, I had an allowance like many kids did, but there was a stipulation. There's one thing I could get beyond my allowance. My parents would buy me anything that they, again, as academics, they both taught at the University of Toronto, deemed educational. So I had to have my allowance for chocolate bars or for going to a movie or whatever, you know, model kits, whatever, toys. But if I said, you know, I want to read about dinosaurs, or I want to go to the planetarium, or I want whatever, that was exempt. That was, of course, right? As a parent, we will provide you with that. So the intellectual, you know, my parents were like any parents. They were good and bad in any number of ways. And they're both dead now, and I miss them both. But in terms of encouraging me or my two brothers who were very interested in computing, for instance, encouraging them. You know, my brother Peter had his first mechanical toy computer in the 1960s, way before most kids would get their first computer, when personal computers became a thing in the late 1970s and an affordable thing in the mid 1980s.
That is absolutely amazing. So, Robert, you've been awarded the Member of the Order of Canada as well as the Order of Ontario, in addition to being one of the initial inductees to the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. With such an illustrious collection of awards for your work, which one of those awards have meant the most to you personally, and why?
So there are two very quick answers. The first major award I won was the Nebula Award from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. I won it for my 6th novel, The Terminal Experiment. By the way, the word you had trouble with talking about the Hugo, hominids, which is the collective term for us, the great apes, and our common ancestors, hominids.
Oh, okay.
So you're a hominid. You should learn how to say it.
Yes.
I'm a hominid.
I remember that word, yes.
Hominids. Anyway, so the Terminal Experiment, because as my editor at the time, I was with HarperCollins at the time, and at the banquet, which was on the Queen Mary, very classy banquet. This is the Academy Award of the science fiction field, big black tie affair.
Cool.
And my editor said to me that night, "You've gone overnight from being a promising newcomer to an established bankable name. So the Nebula had the biggest career impact. But the Order of Canada, which is the precise equivalent of the Order of the British Empire or the Order of Australia, it is the highest award given by the government in my country. I was the first person ever to get it for work in the science fiction field. And just to put that in perspective, the second person to get it for work in the science fiction field was William Shatner, who portrayed Captain Kirk on Star Trek, who of course is from Montreal, Canada.
Love him.
So I love Bill. I worked with him on a project some years ago. But to put it in perspective, to be the guy who broke through to the national highest honor in a field that had never previously been honored, for a field of work that had never been previously honored, meant the world to me. For Americans, this is the counterpart of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's given by the head of state to people who have done surpassingly significant work in their particular endeavor.
That's amazing. I know it must have been very surreal, and I'm sure you can live on the highs from that for probably your whole lifetime, So
if I just look over the top of my monitor there, I can see the medal across the room.
There you go. It's a reminder.
Keeps me going.
Yeah. So when you have a bad day, right? Okay.
That's
so
right.
you have an incredible personal collection of figurines. Which one is your favorite and why?
So my favorite franchise of all time is Star Trek. And number two is the original Planet of the Apes. But this guy here is the guy I keep on the desk next to me.
Oh, wait. I want to put that onto full screen.
Yeah, who is that?
This guy is from Doctor Who, from the third Doctor.
Yes.
His name is Lynx. He's the first time we ever met a Sontaran. And all of that is insignificant. It happened to be the first Doctor Who serial that I ever watched. And I'm very fond of Doctor Who. And it had a line in it of dialogue that this little guy here, my friend Lynx, reminds me of, which is Sarah Jane, a woman who's just met the Doctor and goes on to have many adventures with him, says to him, "Are you serious?" And the Doctor says, "About what I do, yes, not necessarily about the way I do it." And I thought, what a recipe for life. What a formula. People talk about science fiction and sometimes they're dismissive. They'll say it's escapist stuff, for adolescents or arrested adolescents. No, it's a serious mode of social inquiry, of asking big questions about why we're here. Where did we come from? Hominids, our ancestry. Where are we going? Mindscan, another book of mine you referred to, our future. What social impact science and technology is having on us, whether it's robbing of us of our humanity. Very serious stuff. But I try to have fun while I do it. I hope my readers are made to think. Almost, the classic saying, right? You have to entertain first, but at the end, you want them not to be telling people, "Oh, there was a funny line in Sawyer's book," but Sawyer raised this point, and I haven't thought about the world the same way ever since. So, am I serious about what I do? Yes, not necessarily about the way I do it. And my little figurine of Lynx the Sontaran from the third Doctor, Doctor Who, reminds me of that every day.
I love it. I love it. I know this is not on our question list. Have you ever seen any Star Trek movies with the orchestra?
Oh, no, I have not. I know that they do that, right? And they also do that with a live orchestra. But a seminal science fiction film was a silent film called Metropolis. But by Fritz Lang, the German director, one of the seminal black and white films of all time. And I went to see that with live musical accompaniment, and I know how much it can bring.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. We went months ago before COVID, and of course Darth Vader was there, and some of the stormtroopers, and that live orchestra. Oh my gosh, there's just nothing like it.
I'll do it.
Yeah, do it, because you'll never want to watch a movie at home ever again. You won't. Bring on the orchestra. Bring on the orchestra.
Oh my goodness. So your book, The Oppenheimer Alternative, the one behind you, that very famous book that you've just released now, which one of the characters in the book, the characters are phenomenal. Which one's your favorite and why?
So you would think it's J. Robert Oppenheimer, who's depicted in
Right.
silhouette there on the cover of the book, the father of the atomic bomb. And there's no doubt that he's the central character, but my favorite character is very famous in physics circles, but perhaps not as well known generally. His name was Leo, L-E-O, Leo Szilard. And he is the man who first conceived of the notion of a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. In other words, what gives us atomic power, and also he immediately realized made possible atomic weapons. He wrote the letter that was ultimately signed by Albert Einstein to then U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, urging the creation of what became the Manhattan Project, an American effort to beat the Nazis to developing an atomic bomb. But he was this cherubic fellow who seemed to have no visible means of support. He rarely, if ever, actually had an academic appointment. He was always staying in the finest hotels. He had a deal with the chambermaid that when he came home at the hotel, when he came home to the hotel at the end of the day, a warm, steaming bath would already be drawn for him. He did most of his intellectual work floating in a bathtub. He was witty. He was a little bit roly-poly and loved his sweets, his desserts. And he was just this flamboyantly interesting character. And so, although Oppie, as his friends called him, J. Robert Oppenheimer, is the main character, whenever Leo Szilard I had cause to weave him into the action, I was absolutely thrilled because he was such a fascinating character to write about.
Wow. Just talking about that history, all of that is so amazing. I'm a huge history lover. So I know that is just, I don't know, being a part of that is really, really special. Okay, it's been said that you have nailed the physicist in the book. What did it take to write about such famous, or perhaps we should call them notorious people, because that's what we're just talking about here, since they unleashed the atomic bomb on the world with such accuracy? So...
Well, this is what made the book worth doing. You've mentioned very kindly all my accolades, and I've got 23 books, and I had a TV series on American network television. I don't need to work if I don't want to. So what made me do another book, my most previous book was 4 years ago, was the challenge. I was looking, why even sit down and write another book? And the challenge of doing one where for the first time in my career, all of the characters were existing, real human beings. If somebody would argue with me about the characters in one of my previous books and say, I don't think Ponter would do that, I would say, actually, I'm the world's foremost expert on Ponter, and I can tell you with unassailable authority, yeah, he would. I can't do that with these characters. Right. So I had to spend an entire full-time year, just doing research into Oppenheimer and Edward Teller and Albert Einstein, Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, and Leo Szilard, Werner von Braun, who also appears in the novel. The characters, so that those who actually knew them, they're all dead now, but their children are alive. One of the people who said I nailed the characters is Gregory Benford, fine science fiction writer in his own right, but more significantly, as his obituary will hopefully many decades down the road say, professor of physics at the University of California, Irvine, and Edward Teller's graduate student. So he was a student of Teller's. That's the guy. You got him. You nailed him. It took an enormous amount of research. But fortunately, I'm researching. I have a little bit of an advantage over a lot of historical novelists. You're writing a novel set 100 years ago, 200, 300 years ago, or more, back to biblical or classical times. There are no sound recordings of those guys. There are no pictures, photographs of those guys. There's no film of those guys. But all of my characters, I could listen to them talk, hear the cadence and the rhythm of their voices, see many stills and some film of them from the 1930s and 40s and 50s, the period I'm writing about, and really get to know them as well as we can get to know anybody from a generation before our own.
That's fascinating, man. That's really fascinating. And it makes so then the book can be just that much more accurate, and you could feel them, I'm sure.
Well, and the thing about the accuracy is it's freeing, I found, in a certain way, because, the problem with fiction is it has to make sense and it has to ring true. The problem with real people is they often are contradictory in their behavior. Oppenheimer, for sure, was his own worst enemy. He always thought he was the brightest guy in the room, and he always thought he could get away with whatever cutting remark he wanted to make. Well, he foolishly did a couple of things in his life that resulted in one of the guys that he had torn down, he thought, to size, turning out to actually have more power than him, and stripping him in a McCarthy-esque hearing of his security clearance. And at that security clearance, he was hammered at by the prosecutor, who said, "Why did you do this?" Not that particular thing, but something else that brought about his downfall. And Oppie's only ancestor, a genius, a man we recognize as being the head genius of this madhouse that was the Manhattan Project, had to say on the record, because it was the truth, his only answer to why I did this: because I was an idiot. That's the only answer. He did something surpassingly stupid that brought around his downfall. Now, if I had done that in a novel, and my only justification when the character was asked, "Well, why does your character do that?" And I said, "Well, because he was an idiot." We even have a term in writing. We call it the idiot plot, where the plot only advances because the character does something idiotic that nobody in their right mind would have done. But J. Robert Oppenheimer did that, not once, but several times in his life.
Wow.
And I can fall back in the historical record and say, from time to time, he really was an idiot. And you go look for yourself. Here's the trial transcript. Here's his the memoir of his best friend, who was brought down as well because of Oppenheimer's idiocy. It was freeing in a way.
That is amazing. So, Robert, I'm keen to know, with COVID and everything else going on now, it's exactly 75 years since the atomic bomb had dropped. Did you time this release of your book to coincide with this event? Was it part of a marketing strategy?
Yes. But when I started writing the book, which was 4 years ago, I hadn't really been, I thought, most of my books had taken me a year or two to write. I hadn't been conscious of how big a project this was. And it was only about 2 years ago that I said to myself, or even 18 months ago, oh my God, in 18 months, it's going to be the 75th anniversary of the birth of the atomic age, the bombing of Trinity, or the Trinity test, the first explosion, July 16th, 75 years ago, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first uses, and only so far to date, uses of atomic weapons in warfare, August 6th and August 9th, 75 years ago. I realized I could have gone down this rabbit hole of researching Oppenheimer and his colleagues forever, that I had to get the book finished in time to make that publication date, because there would be so much attendant publicity to the 75th anniversary. There would never be another opportunity again for another 25 years until we celebrate the 100th anniversary. And in 25 years, I'll hopefully still be here, but I'll be 85 years old. So yeah, it became the defining structure for when I finished the book and how we decided to promote the book. Absolutely.
Fascinating. Okay, so tell us how you made the decision not to go with the big 5 publishers with a COVID release, and has COVID inspired you another book? I know there's going to be so much that comes out of this time period, I'm sure.
In our 90 seconds that are left, but I can do it. So, of course, the problem was that we had a great deal of interest from the big 5 publishers, and I published with 4 of the big 5, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Hachette, and Penguin Random House previously, but they couldn't make that window of the summer of 2020, the 75th anniversary. Also, they've become, in the 4 years since I did my last book, much more rapacious in terms of rights that they wanted. They'd already insisted for a decade on ebook rights and taking 3/4 of the royalties on ebook rights for them hitting send. Whereas I had, I'd written 100,000 words, which is, 10 times that many times of hitting the keyboard, and I get 1/4 of the royalties and they get 3/4 for hitting enter once to upload. No. I didn't like that. But then they also wanted audiobook rights, which previously authors had retained for themselves. And finally I said, you know what, you're not nimble enough. This is the real world of computers, and people expect things to drop as soon as they're done. And an artist produces an album over the weekend and it drops on Monday on, you know, Spotify and iTunes and so forth. Boom. I wanted to be nimble, and I wanted to control the ebook and the audiobook rights myself, take 100% of the monies instead of just a fraction. So I found very respectable small presses or mid-sized presses to do the print editions, and I controlled the electronic rights.
Good for you. High five, buddy.
High five.
You took the power back.
High five.
Yeah,
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Well done.
Thank you. And it's worked out fabulously for me. Now, it won't be until October 31st that I get the first royalty statements from my print publishers. We'll see how well they did during COVID when most bookstores were closed, right?
I know.
Now, they were the ones who funneled the print editions into Amazon and other online retailers. But their bread and butter has always been the brick and mortar store.
Sure.
And that we were hit with this huge double, triple, quadruple whammy.
I know. Because a lot of Barnes and Nobles have, you know,
and the independents even more so, which is where I always encourage people to buy from their local bookstore. Support your local business, ideally.
Yeah. So where can people find you? Because I know you've got a big meeting. So
sfwriter.com, S is in science, F is in fiction, writer.com, and on all social media that I'm on, which is Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon, it's Robert J Sawyer, all run together, no spaces, no periods. Robert J Sawyer, or sfwriter.com.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. So cool. So I'm going to tell my pastor about your book because he is a huge history buff. So I know he'll love it.
Lovely.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was wonderful having you as a guest. And thank you to everyone that's watched us
Vulcan
live today.
Yes. Live long and prosper. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. We watch this movie all the time in this house. I have teenagers and so, you know, there's the DC and the Marvel arguments all the time. And yeah, it's awesome.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember to write good stuff and to be inspired one conversation at a time. You are watching the Writer's Corner live show with Mary Bridgetti and our special guest today, Robert Sawyer. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.
Bye.